probably one of the greatest failures, or maybe that's too strong of a word, one of the greatest mistakes that I think a lot of evangelicals make is we think of evangelism as like closing the deal. So these kind of weird things start happening. Like you start to feel like a used car salesman because you're trying to push people towards, but I mean, do you want to like pray this prayer or whatever kind of expression that takes? Do you want to accept Jesus? And unfortunately, Mikkel, I think there's a lot of people who are trying to push toward that because of insecurities in their own lives. Their spiritual life a lot of times is deficient, and so they're trying to fill that void with like ministry activism so that they can raise their hand and go, see how the Lord used me, so that they can get this sense of self-worth for, and that expresses itself a lot of times by people who don't listen. They're using the space when someone else is talking to formulate in their own minds how they're going to respond,
right?
Instead of actually listening to what the person is saying. And what I would say to that is, we don't get to do that. Like, Jesus has called us to love people, and that looks like treating them with value and worth because they are valuable and they do matter to God. And so you're not talking to, when you do apologetics or evangelism, you're not talking to somebody who's another notch in your belt. You're talking to somebody who's made in the image of God, who's deeply loved by God, who deeply matters. Their story matters. Their views matter. And so, we don't get to just mow over people. We have to love them.
Yeah. And people can sense right away if you're treating them like a project. They can tell. That just shuts down communication. And I mean, how did you think about 1 Peter 3:15, our command to be prepared always to give an answer to anyone who asks us about the hope that we have in Jesus, but do it with gentleness and respect.
Yeah, that part gets left off a lot.
That's right. And the whole context of 1 Peter 3, how did God... what was God's attitude toward us before we had embraced him or his message? And why can't we be like that with other people? It's how God was with us.
Yeah. Well, it requires somebody to take their personal walk with Jesus really seriously. I mean, you can't just, we have to get away from kind of this superficial Christianity, but I go to church, I do these things, I'm checking these boxes, but the actual substance of a vibrant, healthy relationship with Christ a lot of times is missing for people. And so, I would say if they're like, hey, how do you do evangelism? How do you do apologetics? How do you do these things? I mean, the first thing I would say is, hey, you got to get close to Jesus. There's a way that you can do these things and do them apart from the energizing work of the Holy Spirit. It's called legalism, but there's a lot of us that fall into that, as opposed to, hey, that's not the ultimate aim. Like, I'm never asking myself, how can I do evangelism today? The question is, hey, how can I agree with Jesus? How can I walk with Jesus today? Because I promise you, if you get close to Jesus, you will do evangelism and apologetics. Because, if you follow him, he's leading you to, he's saving the world. So if you're near him, that stuff will absolutely spill over and you'll be involved. But then you'll be involved not in your own strength. You're going to be, he's with you, right? And you're co-laboring with him in the gospel.